How's it going, everyone? Welcome, Eulier Gonzalez. Again, let's take a look at now how to write forms, which is the original way, the OG way to send data over the cable. So why am I looking at this? It's because there is a particularly section on the React applications, particularly the course taught by Josh Komiwa, software engineer that previously worked at Khan Academy and then at Gatsby, and he built this model or this course to explore more about React in depth, right? So not only to read about this content, but also to have is a first-hand experience, which is one of the things that documents like HTML at the end of the day allows to. And this kind of document, which is part of the spec that I'm currently reading here, is that not only that you can read content or you can watch image, but also to look at videos and listen to audios, or even to engage, for example, with Canvas or to content here. So this interactivity, which I do find is one of the powerful things of the HTML or the web in itself, is one of the several layers that I do find that is very compelling and important and powerful, is this ability to share a document, because at the end of the day it all originates is with DARPA as a response to what the Russians did back in 1957 when they launched their first satellites, which puts now Eisenhower to in distress and the nation. So DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, they now develop is initially several protocols or projects related to detect nuclear weapons and nuclear activity, and this is why fields like geology, astrology now comes into place and develop here. But also there was something that a bunch of smart folks, geeky nerd, some of the people that I love at the university, they were now exploring is with this thing called computers, and trying to send data from one computer to another that is geographically separated. So the University of San Francisco, the San Diego, the MIT, the and also some couple of universities like in Iowa and the DC Washington, they were now exploring this thing that we know as the internet. Is that how can we now have all of these different computers geographically separated, and then somehow send data to that? Not only that, but to command and control them. So this is the origin of these projects. So DARPA, they look up into that, and they starting to receive funds from to back this initiative, okay? And this is now what the origins of the internet is. So you also have is this particularly way of trying to create a network and control a network, but it turns out that a bunch of scientists, mathematicians, they figuring out that instead of trying to control the network, because it becomes like a control border problems, something that we can see that right now in the US, right? when they have to build all this huge wall to try to prevent people to come across here. So they say, no, instead of in the case of computers, let's take a look at how the protocol they use to communicate, right? The transmission control protocol. And then so once you know how to communicate, you need to know how to find them. And this is why we have the IP address. There is also some of the protocol wars that came off after this. And it turns out that the precursor of this current standard of how these machines can communicate or can exchange data, regardless the architecture. So how they are organized, whether this is a RISC or CISC or Intel, or regardless how the manufacturers decide to build those, right? Intel and currently now AMD, we need to have a standard to exchange between these systems, these computational systems. This is now known as the OC model, the Open Standard Interconnection, right? So you can take a look at here at the OC model, right? Here, and the Open System Interconnection, right? It became now a standard in 1984 as part of the ISO, and ISO is this organization, so international organization for standards, that it was born in 1947, and it responds currently at 2026 to the principle of the WTO, the World Trade Organization. I didn't make this up. You can take a look at the ISO IC 90. What was that? I got this, by the way. Is here. Currently this is the SQL standards to define is a language on how to query data, right? And which is overseen by a technical group now called the GTC1. All right, and so what am I mentioning here is because on the forward you can look at that, right? So for an explanatory of the voluntary nature of standards, the meaning of ISO specific terms and expressions related to conformity assessment, as well as the information about the ISO adhering to the World Trade's principles, organization principles, in the technical barriers to trade. So it is up to them to actually decide what will be the design or the principles to exchange, in which now all of these standards are built upon that. So again, this is part of the how to build a form, right? But I mentioned this, and I took this quick segue, is because to understand now how do I get here. So this OC model that is describing is in fact part of the release for request for comment. Okay, it's a series of from the principal technical development and a standard settlement body for the internet, most prominently the Internet Engineering Task Force, right? So they have now this here. Requirement for internet host communication layers. As you can see, this is something that is 1989, where they developed this, right? And well, describing is particularly is what'll be is this for. Exactly. So this is one of the RFC of a pair that define and discuss the requirement for internet host software. Exactly. So if you have a computer that is connected to this network, this is the software that needs to have. And this RFC covers the communication protocols like link layer, IP layer, and transport layer. It is companion RFC 1123 covers the application and supported protocols here. So now this is the side, hey, this is a requirement for internet host applications and support. And the other was like that. Exactly, the communication layers. And this was now the applications and support. One was written in 1989, and the other is on the 1989 as well. Interesting. So, so this, right? Well, the summary of this again is pair. So 1112, 1112, and 1113 are pair of that, right? So again, this is the request for comments, okay? That now is describing is this way of communicating different computational systems, and those computational systems must have this a model or this standard implemented, right? This is the Internet Protocol Suite as defined here, and it's a model of networking developed contemporarily to the OC model, and it was funded primarily by the U.S. Department of Defense. It was the foundation for the development of the Internet, and it assumed the presence of general physical link and focused primarily on the software layer on communication with a similar but much less rigorous structure than the OC model, right? In comparison, several networking models have sought to create an intellectual framework for clarifying network concepts and activities, but none have been as successful as the OC reference model in becoming the standard model for discussing and teaching networking in the field of information technologies. So the model allowed transparent communication through equivalent exchange of protocol data units between two parties, though what is known as peer-to-peer networking, also known as peer-to-peer communication. As a result, the OC reference model has not only become an important piece among professionals and non-professionals alike, but also in all networking between one or many parties. Due to its large part, it is commonly accepted user-friendly frameworks. So, I don't want to get loose into the details here. I just want to mention that especially the beautiful things and the richness of creating this document, particularly an HTML form that maybe sounds quite to a lot of folks, but reading that and understanding what is the potentials and the value that we can get from this is, in my case, is at least on the front end we're developing, is to understand first how you now fetch data, not at the OS level, because you can have several libraries to do that. So for example, CURL, right? It allows you to fetch data from another computer over HTTP. Let me show you that real quick here, right? There's a lot of people with code. 30 years here. So command line tool and library for transferring data. Okay, and this is all the protocol that curl supports. So DICT, I'm not quite familiar with all of them. I just want to mention it's the most common one, or that I have experienced. FTP, file transfer protocols, HTTP to transfer now is hypertext documents in a secure way. This is for mailing. LDP, I don't know what is this. MQTT. I should have know how to do this, right? This is another protocol. This is an OAS. The standard for IoT messaging. Okay. For IoT messaging. Okay, it's for capturing events and things like that. So the MQTT is an OASIS standard messaging protocol for the Internet of Things. It is designed as an extremely lightweight publish-subscribe messaging transport that is ideal for connecting remote devices with a small code footprints and minimal network bandwidth. Okay. The MQTT publish subscribe architecture. You will have somebody that emits events, for example, like a temperature sensor, that is going to be now encoded and served to whatever wants to consume that by the broker. Interesting. So again, this is just an exploration of this kind of protocols. MQTT as well, using our encryption. POP, I am not quite familiar with POP as well. I think this is something for email as well. RTSP or SP, I don't know what is this. Protocol. Secure copy protocol. Okay. Oh, this is what. Oh my god. So secure protocol. Okay. Secure copy protocol. Interesting. Secure copy protocol here. Interesting. SME, SMB, SMTP, Telnet, TFTP, WS and WSS. This is for WebSockets here. Protocol, right? Protocol. Okay. Yeah, the WebSocket protocol as well, and it has its own particular spec, right? Yeah. So again, I know this goes beyond of today's video, but it's just to show what are the most common protocols that I'm quite familiar with. Protocols, proxies, HTTP as well, and the several versions to that. It has become so powerful. This FTP, IPv6, for example, for file transfer protocol, secure copy and secure file transfer protocol, TLS for the transfer, quick auth, HTTP compressions algorithm, name resolving connections, transfers URL, and you get now the idea here. So yes, so this is just to mention is this transfer data, all right, but on the web, because with what I mentioned is how you transfer data is with the OS, all right, but now I do need to know how to do that on the web platform, which is what is going to be the main focus in today's video. So right now I'm currently looking at the HTML standard. Understand now the living standard, the introductions, which is, for example, what is the audience intends to, right? They say, hey, it's particularly that you have at least some dumb basic experience, understand things like web IDL, IDL, which is just a fancy way to say, hey, what is the APIs that the browsers must provide as this interface definition language for the web? What is the protocol that they use to send these documents over the HTTP? What is the XML, which is a markup language that allows to define is several documents. Hypermedia is one of them. The other is like mathematics or scalable vectors. All right. And those documents use a specific character set in order to actually, well, as users or the author of those documents, describe them, right? Write them and annotate them. So those character encoding initially was ASCII, and then now we have is the UTF-8, because not only that this is for the Western cultures, but also spread across different places like Southeast Asia, Middle East, even on Eastern Europe, Russia, China, so Asia, and also is the South America, South America and Africa as well. So each one of them has their particular symbols to represent their language, and this is known as the character encoding. To represent their language, and in order to make the computers aware of those symbols, we use a map. Which is this particular numbers belongs to this character, known as the character encoding. So with this understanding, right, and also that how you can style in your documents via CSS, and how you can provide now interactivity using now JavaScript, right? So once you know that, it makes sense of, well, what you can do with these documents here. Because in this scope, on the living standard is just to describe is the semantic markup language. Okay, it's to describe how the semantic level markup and the associated scripting APIs, they are binding together, right? It also describes, for example, some of the styling things, but it doesn't go in too deep. There is a particular spec that goes and describe that. So you have the W3C CSS spec that is organized into several modules, but the other is now the JavaScript of the ECMAScript 262, which define is that language, right? So and here let's go to a little bit of history on the HTML. The TLDR is that right now, at the beginning there was a particular working group dedicated to the HTML. They want to ditch the HTML spec in favor to a new standards, but because companies like Apple and Mozilla, because companies like Apple, Mozilla, and Opera, they have now a dedicated team to them and economic interests to keep going with this, with the developing of this technology and make it backward compatible. This is why they create now a different route known as the WG, right? This WG, which is the web hyper web hypertext application technology working groups, It was dedicating is to make this technology backward compatible for Apple, Opera, and corporate interests, right? So, despite that the W3C exists, and they want to actually move on with the HTML5 and develop another spec to kind of start from the scratch. Then later on, back in 2019, they joined together. Apple, Mozilla, and Opera allow the W3C to publish the specification under the new W3C copyrights, while keeping a version with a less restrictive license. So it's up to the corporate that say, hey, let's going to create a new contract of these copyrights, and let's going to now combine our efforts, you, the consortium, and we as a corporate interest with what WG, and create an agreement or a contract to collaborate on a single HTML version from this moment and on. So now our incentives are aligned. So that was just to briefly mention is how do I get here? That you're not just building your web user interface here and there. There also is a lot of things that is in the background. So having said that, let's finally look at the HTML here, right? Especially on the form. The HTML here form. There you got it. And there you got it here, right? So form is just this component of the web page, right? That has form control, right? And so because of this, now you have is on this form, you can define on this form controls and put a label on those controls. So now users can interact with, and you can use them to collect data, right? And send it to another computer, okay? In this client-server architecture. And that process is made of 3 steps, right? So it doesn't matter the order, but you need to implement them. I'm going to step by step in doing that. So writing the user interface is something that I did in the past videos. So yeah, by writing is these forms and label is just to describe each particular process, right? They say that this is not normative, right? But it's quite helpful to understand all of these basics form controls. So anytime that you want to group now in a forms a bunch of controls, for example, like radio buttons, and in the case that we're building a form for ordering a pizza, it makes sense to, well, what are the size of this pizza? Well, I want to be, it is a large or mid or small, right? And so for that, well, you want to group that into all the possible values that it can be, right? And you do this using our radio buttons. You group them under the name tag, so the browser is aware of this section is that, and I'll be right back very quickly. All right, and we are back. So is this right? So how you can start to work with the form. So how you can grab now is the customer name, for example, as a string, and then how you can get the pixel size, right? And grouping them into a one single possible selection, despite that you can have multiple options using a radio button, or you can also is to define other type of controls like email or phones, right? And some validations that I also put it into a different, so I have them here real quick. So when you can actually validate that in a very nicely way. And sometimes you also want is to collect is the time, the delivery time, which is also exposing now is a particular input like time, all right, which give you is now the hours and minutes. There is also another input that give you now is the local time here, the datetime local zone. Yeah, datetime dash locale. So it give you now in a time zone is the local time zone from that client, but it give you now in a time zone. So that's something that is interesting. And if you are now developing a server to know that, well, you're starting to understand how you can base using now is the time zones to calculate is the current time for that clients. So this is now involving is, for example, things like time and how now time is organized here, or how the previous developers they have thought about time when it comes to developing applications to compute them, and what will be is the time, the base time to be used. So we use now the Greenwich for that. And finally, to make the form submittable, we use the bottom elements, right? So this is what I have built so far, okay? Nothing too fancy, not at all. And you can see this real quick here, right? Nothing too fancy. The only thing that it changed is how this input is presented. I am currently using is now a time, not a date time. When you use now a date time, the input changes dramatically, right? Which thanks to the browsers to implement this, because it's way much more rich and interactive, and the value that it gives is now something like this, right? It gives you now even is the time zone. So in speaking of which, I want to look at that particular input before going into another details, right? Yep. Let's take a look. For example, is the because what I do want to look is the control input, right? And in this one, type attribute locale date and time. Here is describing is when the input elements type is attribute to locale date and time. State the rules in these sections apply. The input element represents a control for setting the value to a string represents a local date time, right? So the question is that what is the datetime locale? Consists of a specific proleptic Gregorian date. What in the French toast is this? Where this specification refers to the proleptic Gregorian calendar, it means the modern Gregorian calendar extrapolate backwards to year 1. A day in the proleptic Gregorian calendar sometimes explicitly refers as the proleptic Gregorian date, and is one of the described using the calendar that even if the calendar was not in use at a particular time or place in question. So proto-Gregorian calendar, the use of Gregorian calendar as to wire format in this specification is arbitrary choice resulting from the cultural bias of those involved in the decision. See also this section discussed here, date, times, and numbers in form for authors, implementing notes regarding localizations and form controls and time. So you can get down into the rabbit hole here. Input author's notes. Exactly. So in the pixel delivery example, the time is specified in this particular format, right? In some locales, however, times are often expressed different when presented to users. For example, in the United States, it's still common to use a 12-hour clock with an AP and PM indicator as after meridian, past meridian. In France, it is common to separate the hours from the minute using the age character. That's interesting. I didn't know that they do that. Similar issues exist with date, with added complications that even the order of the component is not always consistent. For example, in Cyprus, the 1st of the February 2003 will typically be reading as 1, 2, 3, which is the format that Latin America use. While the same day in Japan will be reading as 2003, 02, 1. And even with numbers where local differs, for example, in what punctuation is used in the decimal separation and thousand separators. It is therefore important to distinguish the time, date, and number format using HTML and in form submissions, which are always the formats defined in this specification and based on the well-established ISO 8601 standard for computer readable date and time format. From the time, date, and number format presented to the user by the browser and accepted as input from the user by the browser. The format used on wire, it is in markup and in form submission, is intended to be computable readable and consisting irrespectively of the user locales. Are always reading in this particular format. While some users might see this format, others might see is something like this. So the thing is that there is now a specification for standard for computer readable date format. Let's take a look at this. Oh my god. That's pretty good. That's pretty involved. Yeah, that's pretty involved. So when you see these kind of things like T and the C and characters, weird characters here, it's because they are now based on this standard. ISO 8601 is an international standard converting the worldwide exchange of communication and data and time-related data. It is maintained by the international the ISO, founded in 1947 and was first published in 1988. This standard, with updates in 1991, 2000, 2004, 2019, and an amendment in 2022. The standard provides a well-defined, unambiguous method of representing calendar dates and times in worldwide communications. An unambiguous way to represent calendars and dates in worldwide communication, especially to avoid misinterpreting numeric date across culture. French culture has a way to read that. In the West, for example, in North America, and also in some countries in South America as well. Not to mention that in Japan they read the dates backwards as well, or in Cyprus. So when such data is transferred between countries with different conventions for writing numeric date and times. ISO 8601 applied to this representation and format dates in the Gregorian calendar, including the proleptic Gregorian calendar. What in the French though is the proleptic Gregorian calendar? extend the Gregorian calendar backward proleptically. What is proleptically? Oh, proleptic, anticipation, proleptica. Anticipation from prolesis. Okay, is a proleptic Gregorian calendar. Is an anticipation of the Gregorian calendar. Okay, to dates before it is 1502 introduction, creating a consistent dating system across history. For example, when the US President George Washington was born on 11 February 1731, Great Britain and its colonies still used the Julian calendar. This is interesting because this is not that old. You know, this is not that old, bro. Also referred to as old style dating. When Britain finally adopted the Gregorian calendar in September 1752, Washington birth date became 2022 February 7131. Holy moly, during his life, both dates were observed and commemorated, but the latter is the one used and recognized since then. Julian calendar, and it's interesting. So this is why I kind of do this kind of exploration, because it is deeply involved in a lot of topics that are around this thing that is writing is just simple HTML. So that'll be all for today's video, and take care. Bye bye.